talk us through, first of all, what's the situation on the streets there in Washington, D.C.? The curfew ended a bit more than 2 hours ago. How does it look?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on from Stop Police Terror Project DC. I heard that clip that you were playing earlier about Trump taking that photo op. I want your audience to know, I was at the White House today, and I want your audience to know that there were people, that street in front of that church where Trump was standing for that bizarre photo op, it was filled with demonstrators. And all the police agencies that were there, the D.C. police, military police, park police, they all cleared that area and shot projectiles at protesters just so Donald Trump could take that photo. A colleague of mine that was out there took a pellet to the back of her leg and was bleeding. I mean, it wasn't serious, but it broke her skin and it bruised, and also that Trump could take this ridiculous photo. So this is basically what we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with serious police violence aimed at protesters, a serious effort to quash dissent and political activism here in the United States, certainly in Washington, D.C. And so there were flashbang grenades. One landed pretty near my foot. Certainly tear gas, pepper spray, pellets with gas in them. Some of us call them pepper pellets. I'm not sure the technical name for them is. But all these sorts of repressive measures to try to quell protest. And I left at one point, but it's my understanding that even at this very moment, police are attempting to kettle protesters, maybe for last arrest. And I should point out that the police began their repressive measures before the 7 o'clock curfew. So their tactic to me seemed to be to get us away from the White House before 7 and to maybe set people up, basically, to stage people for mass arrest after the curfew. And so it's actually still going on at this very moment. I do not believe things have abated as of yet.
We are getting live pictures in right now. Obviously, you can't see them, Sean, but people still marching the street of Washington, D.C. So clearly the curfew is in place, but not being entirely adhered to. From the point of view of your group right now, what did you make of Donald Trump's address this evening?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump, not only through his address, but through declaring, quote-unquote Antifa, whoever that is, as a terrorist group, is making it very clear that he intends to use military force, direct military force, more so than the already militarized police, to squash protests and demonstrations and really political dissent here in the United States. And if you notice, there have been all kinds, his administration has already deployed sort of, narratives of dubious substance to try to undermine the tactics, talking about, quote unquote, outside agitators. We've got other political officials talking about drug cartels and Russian interference. I mean, just anything to try to obscure the fact that not only are people in the United States sick of racist police terror, not only are they disgusted and enraged by the police deaths of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Sean Reed in Indianapolis, Indiana, who, by the way, was one of 3 people killed by Indianapolis police in 8 hours. But you also have to understand that the American government left us completely out to dry, abandoned us under the conditions of the coronavirus pandemic. While the Democrats and Republicans saw fit to bail out banks and billionaires and CEOs and Wall Street, they saw fit to throw the rest of us a little $1,200, if we could get that. And I'm in Washington, D.C., one of the most expensive places to live in this country, and I can tell you that $1,200 doesn't get very far. So we have tens of millions of people unemployed, thrust into housing insecurity and food insecurity, and it's the first of the month, so there are a lot of people today getting smacked with back rent who don't know what they're going to do. And on top of all of that, on top of having their entire livelihood put at risk, folks are now reminded that they could be a victim of police terror and not face any justice. And I want to be clear, even though Derek Chauvin, Mr. Floyd's murderer, even though he got arrested and got a third-degree murder charge, that's not justice. And the other 3 officers who stood by and watched the man die, watched their colleague kill a man in front of them, did nothing. they are still at hand. And so I would say that the abandonment of the American people under the coronavirus and these ongoing issues of racist police terror, which to me are both sort of intertwining contradictions of the capitalist system here in the United States, has led to a kind of perfect storm that has led to the intense resistance we've been seeing in D.C., in Minneapolis, and indeed across the country here in recent days.
When you look at the broad protest movement, and I appreciate right now, it's hard to define various groups, who's involved and so on. We've even seen at different moments, people vandalising places and other protesters saying, you're not doing that in our name. Do you still see, though, why such a rise in violence and destruction is meaning authorities have to react at the moment?
Well, the authorities are the authors and directors of the violence. And this is what I want your audience to understand. It is the police, all of these agencies, who are attacking these peaceful protests. And on that note, I just have to say that it's bothersome to me that, so many people want to knock themselves out to emphasize a quote-unquote peaceful protest and how people should be peaceful. I want to remind folks, demonstrators do not have batons, they don't have tasers, they don't have guns, they don't have flashbang grenades or pepper spray or tear gas. Demonstrators don't have any of that at their disposal. On top of the fact, what they don't have above all else is the ability to kill someone with impunity. But the police do. They have all of that and so much more. So it's strange to me that no one ever asks the police why aren't they being peaceful, or whether they will be peaceful at any given time when they have been the orchestrators of chaos in D.C. and all throughout this country. This is frustrating to me, to say the very least.
Well, I think there are lots of questions being asked of police. Certainly a lot of the images we've been getting, there are questions asked about use of force, cars driving into protests. I think questions are being asked. But the question I'm putting to you is the aspect of this, not just in pushing back against violence on the street, but the looting we've seen, the fires and so on. Does that distract from the cause?
No. I think there's been a sharp attempt to shift the narrative that way. That's why the quote-unquote outside agitator narrative has been propagated by both conservatives and liberals. Because in truth, the ruling class in this country, regardless of which party they belong to, don't want their authority threatened. They don't want this system threatened. They don't want relations in this country threatened.